Hey everybody, this is PD from the Spinner Rack, and we also have
Calvin Ellis, ready to rock.
today we've decided to talk about, wait for it. This is gonna work. You see that?
I can see it.
Stanley's documentary. They finally did something for our favorite Marvel guy, right?
Yep.
So
We
they did
finally decided, hey, the chairman emeritus deserves something. Let's give him something.
so they did this doc, and it gets a little into his history, his family life, and the creation of the Marvel characters. Now this is an hour and 26 minutes. So, in if you've read any books on Stanley, you could go on forever talking about the history, the time, the crash of comic books to get you into all this. But this is just a light documentary. Regretfully, this light documentary came under fire from Neil Kirby, saying that there were too many eyes. It's I. Like he said, didn't share this, that, and the other. But otherwise, it's a lot of pieced together interviews. So
A lot.
yeah, so it's like it's in pieces where you're not going to get him what like we have documentation by Stan in books that were named by Stan saying, hey, I plotted this thing, I plot the artist came, they did he said it. No, actually I don't even know why. He said it a million times. He's like the artist can do it any way they wanted to, that sort of thing. But what um I think Neil Kirby wanted. Well, let's talk about the documentary. What do you think about the documentary so far? 'Cause we're going to get to some of the middle bits about it. But what did you think of the documentary? Let's start there.
Well, I'm sorry. You brought up Neil Kirby, so I'll just speak to it very quickly. I think what Neil Kirby wanted was for this thing to be about Kirby. That's pretty much where it seems to use at. The documentary. I mean, we did talk about it a little before we started the show, but the documentary I thought was Stanley light, and I was disappointed in that as this is for Marvel, and I honestly believe that I mean, we could have done the same documentary. We could have gotten the same. I mean, all the footage that they got there is pretty much public domain that we could have taken, put together and done the same thing. I would have liked something. I would have loved to see something longer rather than an hour and a half documentary. Maybe like something that went over like in parts, maybe like a three-part where we could really get to see some of the stuff he did, not just with the initial days of Marvel, uh, but maybe some of the earlier works that he did with Timely Atlas, then coming through the Bronze Age, and the amount of effort that he put in for the Marvel properties outside of the comics. One of the things that they didn't address, which I would have loved for them to address, is if you were a kid reading comics in the 70s, 80s, you probably grew up with that banner at the beginning of every comic, and it would say Stanley Presents. And I would have loved for them to explain how that got into the comic because that's a pretty cool story as well. And a lot of people, a lot of guys don't know it. And I thought that would be definitely something to bring in, more to give more scope to what he did, not just as the co-creator with a bunch of stuff, but as a creator, and where he doesn't get a lot of credit as an editor.
Yes, and that's the thing of it is the final product that came out of, and that's ultimately towards the end with the well, not with most of the collaborators, but with Kirby. Um, that's what he was trying to present. That at the end of the day, when it came to the stories, we worked together, and the end product was filtered through him, right? So basically, in saying, but they were their stories as a group. Now, the hard part is if you have two historians in Roy Thomas and Mark Evaner saying that well, at least when Mark Evaner was on the before Kirby passed, well, right when Kirby passed, he said it, is that we should just view this as a collaboration because you can look at it, the things that Kirby added, the things that Stan did towards the end as far as the editing, that can make this more his, that sort of thing, back and forth, the initial stuff together, and the period where Marvel is really rolling in the mid 60s, and there's not enough time to even do heavy plotting. Just saying, make this villain. Okay, Kirby's coming with some new characters, this, that, and the other. But what he wanted is to say that, hey, Stan, say what Kirby created and what you created. And ultimately, the historians know, and a lot of his peers know, both Kirby and Stan have bad memories. And this is, their memories have always been bad. So the idea when you hear Kirby talking about the Hulk is that the Hulk came up from a woman who couldn't, had to save her kid, and she lifted up a car, and it's like, that's the TV show. Like, how is he supposed to? How is the TV show enter? Like, that had nothing to do with what the Hulk being stuck in a bomb and looking like Frankenstein, having Jekyll and Hyde and Frankenstein in him. So it's like the two of them have very bad memories. You're not going to get too many details of particular, and everything was at that point rolling really fast. But Neil Kirby is at the point where he's had some success with getting some things where people feel that the Kirby family won, that they got they are got a big settlement from Marvel, which we don't know what it is, but they did get compensated in some way. Excuse me, but they like at this point now it's like you can't talk Stan without saying Kirby created everything, and that's what gets into the problem, which is they presented a interview that I listened to. I was very surprised by when this Jack's 70th birthday in 1987, and Stan calls in, and it gets a little, there's a little bit of tension. It's not as bad as people taking 1987 and filtering to 2023. It's a lot. It looks like it's a big wrestling type of fight. So I'm gonna play some of this.
Special surprise guest that we have for tonight's program, your colleague in arms, Stan Lee. Good morning, Stan. Are you?
Hi, how you doing?
Okay. And
I want to wish Jack a happy birthday. This is a hell of a coincidence. I'm in New York and I was tuning in the radio, and there I hear him talking about Marvel, and I figured, well, I might as well call and not let this occasion go by without saying many happy returns, Jack.
Well, Stanley, I want to thank you for calling, and I hope you're in good health, and I hope you stay in good health.
I'm doing my best, and the same to you. You were talking earlier about your drawing, and people sometimes criticized your figures and so forth. I always felt that the most important thing about your drawings, I remember when I was a kid and I first saw Captain America, it wasn't the correctness of the anatomy, but it was the emotion that you put in. To me, nobody could convey emotion and drama the way you could. I didn't care if the drawing was all out of whack, because that wasn't important. You got your point across, and nobody could ever draw a hero like you could. And I just want to say, without getting too saccharine, that one of the marks, I think, of a really true great artist is he has his own style. And you certainly had and still have your own style, and it's a style that nobody has even been able to come close to. And I think that's something you can be very proud of, and I'm proud of you for it.
I have to thank you for helping me to keep that style, Stanley, and helping me to evolve all that. And I'm certain that whatever we did together, we got sales for Marvel. And I
think it was more than that, Jack. We certainly got the sales, but whatever we did together, and no matter who did what, and I guess that's something that'll be argued forever, but I think that the product that was produced was really even more than a sum of its parts. I think there was some slight magic that came into effect when we worked together, and I am very happy that we've had that experience.
Well, I was never sorry for it, Stanley. It was a great experience for me, and certainly if the product was good, that was my satisfaction. And I've always felt like that. And I think it's the feeling of every good professional. And it's one of the reasons I respect you is the fact that, you're certainly a good professional and you're certainly fond of a good product. And I feel that's the mark of all of us.
You notice I never interrupt you when you're saying something nice about me.
Let me say something nice about Stan Lee, the editorial piston behind the motor of Marvel Comics. And of course, Stan Lee has been active in so many other areas. Stan, what are some of the things that you are proudest of, and what are you involved in now?
Well, actually, I guess I'm proud of just about it. I'm the kind of guy, I'm proud of everything that has succeeded, and I've totally forgotten anything that might have failed. Right now, New World Pictures has bought Marvel Comics, and they're really a great outfit. Obviously, they do motion pictures. In fact, they changed their name recently to New World Entertainment. They do television series, video cassettes, and I've gotten involved in all of those aspects of the business as well as their animation studio. So I'm only really peripherally involved in the comics, and I've never been happier because I guess I like being busy, and I've never been busier.
And out of the fairness doctrine, what, Jack, are you currently doing?
I'm probably involved in the same sort of thing.
Oh my God, that means that the two of you, who indelibly changed the history of comics when you were both in that field, have a shot at changing the course of animation, perhaps.
Well, I feel that productive people are always doing something productive. And speaking for myself, I've never stopped.
Well, let me now desaccharinize the conversation, and let's get down to both of your assessments of the state of comics today. I mean, enough can never be said about what you have done in the history of comics, but I'd like for some specific comments.
It was still good in '87.
In regard to the changes that have taken place in comics, such with the new approach to Batman, for instance, the current Spider-Man series, the introduction of ambiguity, conflict, and contradiction in issues and ethics today. What do you have any views on that?
What do you want first?
You, since you spoke first.
Okay. Well, actually, I think that we had plenty of conflict. And when we were starting our early strips, certainly there was conflict in the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and all of them. And we had, I think, really Marvel sort of pioneered playing up the characterization more and playing up the personal problems of the heroes, making the heroes more believable because they were more realistic and more human. However, today what has happened, and it's a natural evolution, today they've gone many steps beyond what we started doing in those days. I think the stories primarily are much more complex. They're more adult. They tackle subjects that we couldn't dream of tackling in the early days. And I think it's strange. When Marvel started, our stories were very much like the motion pictures of those days. Today, the comics, especially I think Marvel comics, are very much like the motion pictures of today. Well, the motion pictures of today are so much different than they were then, and the same change, the same evolvement has really taken place in comic books.
Well, I think Stanley is correct on that, and of course the standards have changed, and the standards have changed in all the fields. And I'll agree with what Stanley says of all the facets of entertainment, because he understands it, and he understands it as well as I do. Whatever is evolving, I couldn't put my finger on it, but it's certainly different from the black and white type of thing that we did in what you refer to as the golden age.
Are there things that you look at with interest these days?
Oh, sure. Now, there's a DC series called The Watchmen, which I think was absolutely superb. There's the work that John Byrne has been doing, the work that Frank Miller has been doing.
All right, can we take a pause here?
There are so many new artists coming up that they're very sophisticated.
Sorry. Yeah, there you go. What's up?
Oh no, a couple things. you know, I think the questioning later. I think the questioning later on will be. We'll get to like the hot button topics that everybody loves to siphon from this. But uh, one, again, I don't think a lot of people would have got the fact that Stan Lee was reading Watchmen. You know,
Yeah.
Stan Lee's reading Watchmen, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this is this is dynamite. This right over here, this is pretty good stuff." The fact that Stan and what is he talking? He's talking about a DC book. Okay, he's talking about a DC book. He's still very much attached. This is 87. So
Yeah,
he's still very much attached. He's still very much attached to Marvel. Yeah, he's still very much attached to Marvel at the end of the day. But he's checking this stuff out. Like, yeah, okay, I can see where this is going at the end of the day. And no shots fired. No, on either the part. I'm always surprised when I hear Jack Kirby speak because anytime I see his written stuff, I always think he's like a bit more has like more grouchy tone, like the Thing, Ben Grimm. And they're pretty much both soft-spoken guys at the end of the day. But no shots fired over any of the stuff until until the questions actually lead them there at the end of the day. But I mean, that's just a watershed moment. That it's 87, and if you would ask Stan Lee, hey, what are you reading? I'm reading this book, Watchmen. Have you heard about it? It's just wild.
Yeah. Hold on, let's see if we can jump to
literacy. If not for comics, I don't. And after a while, when they get,
I should say, title association.
Oh, and it was revolutionary.
The people today, it would be
in facilitating the importation of drugs for money for all.
Fabulous Flo Steinberg, who was too shy to be in the studio today. History ever produced a good story without having that type of material, dialogue or stands? But you
I'll say this: every word of dialogue.
Here we go.
Dialogue or stands, but who exactly did what, although it would be interesting to know whether or not Galactus's exit speech in FF number 50 was an example of Jack's dialogue or stands. But
okay, so you heard the question. The question was, who came up with the dialogue for Galactus? Right? So he's not out of bounds. He's not out of bounds in answering this question if he wrote the dialogue. But it's been presented as an attack on Kirby. The person asks, like I'm asking you, who wrote that? You? Is it you or Mario? Which one? Do you say? If you say you wrote it, does that mean that you're insulting Mario? I mean he did nothing?
No, because I wrote it.
So here we go. Let's see. Let's make sure.
Say this: every word of dialogue.
Who exactly did what, although it would be interesting to know whether or not Galactus's exit speech in FF number 50 was an example of Jack's dialogue or stands. But
I'll say this: every word of dialogue in those scripts was mine.
I don't want
every story.
And I don't want to get into controversy about that. What I want to stress to you and to anyone who would be hearing this is that you two gents together, when you said the whole equals more than the sum of its parts, it is very true. I think that was the success behind the Beatles.
You can't throw that gauntlet down and take it back.
There seems to be.
I can tell you that I wrote a few lines myself above every.
Here we go.
I've seen those.
They weren't printed in the book.
All right, look, both of you, hey, kids, both of you guys.
Jack isn't wrong by his own lights because, Jack, answer me truthfully.
I wasn't allowed to write.
Did you ever read one of the stories after it was finished? I don't think you did. I don't think you ever read one of my stories. I think you were always busy drawing the next one. You never read the book when it was finished.
Dialogue, Stanley.
Huh?
Let me get in there with it.
Listen to my own dialogue. And I think that's the way people are. So whatever was written in them it was the action I was interested in.
I know, and I really think, and look, Jack, nobody has more respect for you than I do, and you know that, but I don't think you ever felt that the dialogue was that important. And I think you felt, well, it doesn't matter. Anybody can put the dialogue in. It's what I'm drawing that matters.
Evan has
and maybe
said.
You're right. I don't agree with it, but maybe you're right.
No, I'm only trying to say is that you know, I think that
I did the whole
a
thing.
human being is very important. If one man is writing and drawing and doing a strip, it should come from an individual. I believe that you should have the opportunity to do the entire thing yourself.
Gentlemen, what we're seeing here
Your own story.
is part of the inner dynamics, from the bit of conflict from which obviously you complemented one another, held one another in check, and a great product emerged. I said,
No, see, he started that nonsense, and now he's trying to squash
the
it.
creators of today, that the success of Marvel and the success of Bill Everett's Submariner and the success of almost anything that was really great had to do with the attention to science, to characterization, to detail, to verisimilitude, to keeping a grerer attention to the characters than to
Cut.
them and, you know, signing.
I'm trying to wrangle the show back. The show's
No,
control.
he started it. He started it.
Yeah.
He was not clever enough of an interviewer to keep it general, okay? But there's no way on God's green earth you've got Stan Lee, Jack Kirby there on an interview, and then you say something like, yeah, I would love to know who wrote this when Stan Lee's the writer, okay? And he's sitting there like, well, I could probably just let this go, but I wrote it. I wrote it. I wrote all of that. And then, of course, Jack was like, well, yeah, I put a little dialogue in there, too. And Stan's like, come on, Jack, you never read the books when they were finished. You never read them. You didn't think the dialogue mattered. Like, well, and he's like, well, no, Bill Everett in the Submariner. Bill Everett's not on the show.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill Everett's not on the show. And it's pretty clear who created the Submariner. There's no question as to that when it comes to Bill Everett and the Submariner. This stuff over here, okay, the greatest, with the exception of one, the greatest comic book superhero collaboration of all time. And you know, come on, they're not going to answer. That'd be like asking, I would love to know if the Silver Surfer design was like just one person's idea or collaboration. You think Jack Kirby was going to just let a question like that go? Come on, you're not being realistic at the end of the day. And then to come on, let's try to wrangle it back. Oh no, Stan already showed you the blueprint for how this interview needed to go. Keep it here and we're good. But the second you start getting into, hey, who did what and what credit, oh, it's a good thing. Well, it's a good thing Steve Ditko never did interviews.
Well, the hard part is when I first heard it, because I had read, which I'm just going to click on it quickly. The Comics Journal in '85 did an interview with Jack, and he talks about coming up with the Fantastic Four. So this is the thing that okay, this is for any creator, right? Outside of like points where you have what's the name saying, there's an interview with Claremont and Byrne where they're not together and they're talking about the X-Men, and he says they say who put the Wolverine hunting in the what's the name, and Byrne is like, well, that was Chris's, and he's like, and who gave Wolverine the name of Logan? He said, well, and Claremont said, well, that's Burns. Both outside of that, most of the time it's like how you see here. Ask him a question, can you explain how you came out how that came about? And he says, I had to do something different. Everybody says I. So the thing of it is, and I don't have any problem. I am a big, huge fan. I bought a ton of Kirby stuff. But this interview, not because of the eyes, because there's no get out. If you have issue with Stan taking too much credit, then you should have issue with this. But this came out, and I felt that at the same time, but I wasn't, in listening to it now, you could hear the guy asking the question, what else is Stan going to say? Like, he can't not say that. Well, we kind of worked out the dialogue alone, like together. And he's like, no, I was sitting in there and I'd get the book and I would dialogue it. And that's not, the thing of it is, that's not even getting into plotting. And people are functionally illiterate where they're like, wait a second, he said he wrote all the dialogue. That means he wrote everything. Stan, on Stan speak that, no, it means he asked him about the dialogue.
That means the word bubbles, the captions. That's what he was doing. Kirby was handling the art. I'm gonna I don't even want to go down that road, but you know, the finished product is what it is. And then again, and the other thing is that Stan was the editor, and we already know that you know it's on record that if Stan didn't like what somebody wrote, he was going to change it anyway. Okay, so Kirby could write whatever he wanted. Okay, Kirby knows well that regardless of whatever he may have put on the page or say, if Stan didn't like it, it wasn't going to see print. That's not where his energy was going to be focused on. Oh no, I cannot imagine that Kirby was coming back and saying, "Hey, that line over here with Sue Storm is saying this type of stuff." You know, I don't think she would really say that. No, that's not where his energies were at the end of the day. And we keep forgetting that Stan was the editor. Okay, Larry Lieber turned in some stories. Larry Lieber was his brother. He's like, I don't like the way this guy writes. You know, I'm not using this stuff over here. And the same with the with anyone else up to the point. Well, we already know the stuff with Roy Thomas where he was still editing it, and they were like, look, you know, we can't get this stuff out. You know, we need you to take a step back. But that's the same situation that you would have right here. So the idea that okay, I was over here doing no, you're not writing this. It's just disingenuous. Okay, you may put this stuff on. Stan was going to write it because this is the guy who was a kid in the shop who was sweeping up the place, doing the editing, writing the stories. He probably had full faith and confidence in his own abilities to do this stuff over anybody else's. He was not going to have to lift from anybody else, and more than likely, he didn't think anybody else was really that good at it. Oh, yeah. One other thing to throw in is what you've always noted is that the dialogue, the style of writing and the style of speaking is Stan Lee's way of dialogue. This was not somebody else's style of dialogue. It didn't resemble the speech patterns, the nuances of any of the dialogue that we would have seen, say, at DC Comics or at the other comic places. This was something that is, you know, that's Stan Lee's at the end of the day. So if somebody did do something, they might have been trying to emulate his style, okay, but it wouldn't have been, you know, it would have been really clear if it was somebody else doing the writing, well, even the dialogue.
If you go to this is the hard part, right? So it's like they have Rod saying, I remember Jack would call him up and say it's gonna be this kind of story and that sort of thing. And Kirby says, remember this, Stan Lee was an editor. He worked from 9 to 5 doing business for Martin Goodman. In other words, he didn't write anything in the office. He did Martin Goodman's business. That was his function, right? So it's like saying, you know, like saying that's what his job is. He's saying he's not right, you know, he's not the writer. So that's the hard part here.
Yeah. Calling him a fraud.
Yeah, so you have it here. And that's the thing. This is what people are, what's the name, saying, no, Stan Lee didn't know what a mutation was. There's a ton of Marvel books that deal with mutation. Everyone's reading the same pulp articles and that. They're both well read, so they're both reading the same sort of stuff, right? So the fact that Stan has mutant stories, or Marvel, he bought mutant stories, so the stories that don't have his name on it, which probably from other writers, he would have read those stories, and it all comes from sort of the same place. So the hard part is that when we go to this other thing here, you know, one of the issues that, Jack's grandson is saying that, you know, he comes in and says, I, you know, and not talking about him coming in with the idea. And it's just like, every interview is the same. Stan has a bunch of eyes. Kirby has a bunch of eyes. It's just across the board. But the difference is that Stan also said we were both the writers on this thing, right? He said, sometimes I tell him who the next villain is and he does the story. Sometimes he brings the story in. And it's like, and that's also a portion of damage control because he was, you know, Stan was upset at how Kirby felt about the Herald Tribune article. So Kirby was upset. Roz called him up complaining, and then he didn't promote that article. The writer called up and said, hey, Stan, you promote everything. Why aren't you promoting this article? It's like, I can't. Kirby's upset. It's like, why? He's like, I don't know, but he's upset, so I can't promote it. And then when Kirby's gone, and they do a thing for Rolling Stone, but a Marvel insider, I think her name was Robin Green, she took over Flo's job after she left Marvel. She worked at the Rolling Stone. So Marvel was like, all right, we know we can trust her to not turn us into fiasco where anyone would be upset. And in the article, Kirby had just left, and Stan was remorseful. He wasn't like, I did it all. He was like, like I lost my right hand. My right hand man is gone. Like he's upset. And that's, you can see in the articles and that sort of thing. So when people look at it and they look like they had a fight over creation. Yes, Kirby had some point where he felt he had created, he didn't co-create, he felt he created all this stuff and deserved more. He felt he needed more from the company. At the same time, where Kirby was struggling with Martin Goodman, because they say that might be why he changed his style. But at the same time, Stan was working. They were saying he was doing as much as he could, but at the same time, he's also in business. And Roy Thomas kind of puts it in a different way, where he kind of says that it's kind of tough when you have like you're the boss, but at the same time, it kind of looks like he's doing something, but it's not actually what's happening, because he's not in the office all the time. So it's not like Stan is just giving it to Kirby every day, but it can be that things over time for Kirby just became more problematic. These, like different editorial things where he's just like, oh, come on. And then at some point they stopped going to Kirby for stuff. They just do it in the office. All right, we already got people cleaning up the artwork, so I'll just have Romita change this panel and that sort of thing. But when you look at it, Stan is trying to keep things together. He's saying positive things about Kirby as a collaborator. Towards the end, he's allowing Kirby to write the Inhumans. He's writing in something like that, but at the same time, he breaks out. He goes above Stan's head to get a contract, and the contract they sent back was way lower than what he was already getting from Marvel. So he's just like, what? And that's when he makes his jump. But it's like, that's not through Stan. That's through thinking, all right, well, I'm not letting Stan hold me back, and they don't really know who's in the business. They only know Stan. That's so it's a hard thing. And the representation of it is that this happened, not this article, but that he left and they kept, even though there was the funky Flashman, they talked again. They smoothed it out. He came back to Marvel. He finished out. He left. His contract was still going on. He did the cartoon for Marvel. They allowed that work to go to his comic contract. He was talking with Stan. We got the Silver Surfer graphic novel, which I point out, that's when people say, oh, they weren't. It's on I think back issue. They said, oh, they weren't talking, but they got this done. Like, no, they were talking, and that's how it came together. So, and then next thing you know, Marvel had another contract for Kirby. They were going to bring him in '81 to come back, but at the same time, he felt, rightfully so, that they were hoarding all the stuff from the '60s, all the old artwork, and they were making a distinction on just that artwork, saying, hey, this is because they didn't want to give up any of that stuff. So that became a thing of contention, and rightfully so. Kirby said no, he declined, and he moved on. But as you can see it blowing up. I don't know if there's anything else in this article. I thought they smoothed it out at this point, but what I remembered might be the beginning part where they had all the niceties, and then it goes left after. I didn't remember that he asked the question that led to the blow up.
Autographs at conventions, and that pretends trying to make the thing seem as real as possible, having characters grow, having characters die, having Reed and Sue get married and have a child, whom, by the way, should be adult by now and dating one of the X-Women, is not only showing the attention to the detail of the characters, but is an assurance that readers will not outgrow the comics and will stay with them, because it is not an immutable fact of life that you outgrow comics at 13.
When you mention an ego problem, the funny thing is, I'm afraid those problems are only cropping up now. I think when Jack and I did the strips, there was no ego problem. We were just doing the best we could at the time.
Well, ego is the fuel of creativity, and I'm very proud.
Yeah, see, he'll be making trouble.
Jack Kirby and Stan Lee live on Earthwatch on WBAI New York. My name is Robert Knight, joined by Warren Reese and Max Schmid. And as we close this program, I would like each of you to make a concluding statement. And first you, Stan, and then you, Jack, because it's your birthday.
Okay, well, since it is Jack's birthday, I want to make, I wish I had had time to prepare something. I didn't. But I just want to say that Jack has, I think, made a tremendous mark on American culture, if not on world culture. And I think he should be incredibly proud and pleased with himself. And I want to wish him all the best, him and his wife, Roz, and his family. And I hope that 10 years from now, I'll be in some town somewhere listening to a tribute to his 80th birthday. And I hope I'll have an opportunity to call at that time and wish him well then, too. Jack, I love you.
Well, the same here, Stan. But, yeah, thank you very much, Stan. But, Warren, are you there?
We're all
Yes,
here.
I am, Jack. And
Now, listen, you can understand now how things really were. And of course, I want to thank you for inviting me on your show, and
I could thank Robert and Max for that.
thank everybody for their courtesy, and it was very pleasant to talk to you.
Well, I must inject this one point of disagreement with you, Jack Kirby. And that is, it is we who have you to thank, you and Stan.
Amen for that.
So there we go. We did it. The way they presented it was, you know, it's going to be a tough thing because regretfully, the hard part of it is the dialogue, the writing part is the thing of contention for Kirby, obviously. So,
Well, I think, and let me say this first, because I really don't want to come across like a Stan Lee apologist at the end of the day, but that's just where this, I mean, if it was like 20, 30 years ago, I'd probably be over here like, no, look at all the stuff Jack did here and so on and so forth. But the amount of work that Jack Kirby produced in 1 year for Marvel, I have never heard of another artist able to have that sort of output. And this is a man who was still creating and doing comics up until the point where he just couldn't do them anymore, if I recall correctly. But there's a bunch of stuff nobody even heard about in the 80s, and he was still working. Almost like New God sequels type of stuff at the end of the day, and the name of the books escape me. But he was, I mean, all over the place in terms of the art, in terms of the books, and without a doubt, Marvel is the house. The Jack Kirby without had a hand in building. Nobody can question his output. Nobody can question his contribution, and nobody can question the influence of his art style, which a lot of people took for granted until Jack Kirby became the cause celeb, where they were rushing to the Bastille to go liberate. The only time they really seemed to go after the whole thing. So there shouldn't be any question as to the credit that Jack Kirby should receive, but the credit for the stuff that he actually did. And a lot of times when I listen to this, I mean, even at the end where Stan says what he does, and you can, at least when I'm listening, Jack Kirby, it just feels like, look, he's still wrestling with some stuff. I don't want to say bitter, but still wrestling with some stuff at the end of the day where he can't even express himself, at least not on the air. And I don't know if they met for the last time after this particular interview. But accepting the contributions and accepting the credit for those particular contributions. And I just think at this point, I don't think he was quite there, but he's approaching that zero-sum game where I had a hand in everything, Spider-Man, that type of stuff, which I don't think is really befitting the legacy that he created for himself. That is a hard thing. That's the hard thing always for me to hear or to read about in terms of that particular dynamic. And people can lay a whole bunch of stuff at Stan Lee's feet. He didn't credit people as he should have, so on and so forth. And again, that's hard for me to accept because he was coming out of he's coming out of a business where people didn't get credited at all.
yes.
And then the credits, he starts the credits at the end of the day. And then it becomes, oh, well, you didn't credit them right. Well, how did I not credit them right? These guys don't usually get credited at all. I'm, crediting the people, and the people complaining about this. Okay, I changed the credits. You give more credit. I needed to go back in time and credit people to the justification and satisfaction of people in the 80s and 90s. It just wasn't there. It's like, what is it? Twilight Zone 64 is the first artwork in a comic book by Frank Miller. I looked through that comic book to try to find out which story it did. You can't even tell because it's not credited.
Mm-hmm.
It's not credited at the end of the day. So that type of stuff I try to keep in mind. There's a bunch of stuff you can lay at the feet of both of them, but the whole idea, and it's a totally Marxist viewpoint that there's the oppressor and the oppressed, and Stan because he made good as the oppressor, and Jack Kirby is the oppressor, so we got to side with him at the end of the day. And Jack is saying some stuff that, I think for me the best part of the interview, and I thought he was just playfully chiding him at the end of the day. It's like, come on, Jack, you didn't read the stuff when it was done. Okay, you didn't read the stuff when it was done. You were focused on the art, and that the artist, that's cool, but you weren't really reading the stuff he was done. If not, then we could have definitely had those conversations. If you would have definitely heard about the conversation, like, yeah, I put dialogue in here, Stan took it out, and we never got to that point. So, it's a tough one for me at the end of the day. But that's just the place. That's just the place he was in at this time. And this is '87.
Well,
when is what is it, Jack? I forget when Jack Kirby passed away, but
90, was it 92?
Oh man, so
92, 94. Was it 94? It might be 94.
I know it's 90 something because he was still did a cover. I don't know. That might have been posthumously.
It had to be 94. So Image Happens. We have that.
He did some work with Eric Larson on a cover that was
yeah.
But I keep forgetting that was posthumously published because Jack Kirby had passed away by that time.
Yeah, 94, February 6, 1994. And incorrect, I said grandson. I think is Neil Kirby is his son. So that's ultimately, in going along with what you were saying, the hard part is fighting over something that is something that shouldn't, for these radio guys. They are, why would they even go to the dialogue? Like, that means that, hey, the thing that the hook of the thing is what people saying. That angle, the portion of what Stan was doing was a big part of the Marvel mystique. The art was definitely there, the action, how it was, but being an editor and kind of taking, even it's like counting on your artist to do more than you would with a full script, actually freed them to be the director, to basically take your, even if it's a springboard, if it's a full plot or a springboard, just take it and just say, here's how I'm going to display it in a more action-packed way, because the artist can think more visually than a writer can. So it's like you had something that really opened up and was the kind of hook for Marvel, that you had these artists who were free to kind of do, figure out the angles, make it a little more dynamic. Once people got up to speed, they were able to do that stuff. So that's a important part, even if it's saying, and at the same time, if you ask for it, like Steve Ditko did, like Steranko did, you would get the plot and credit. That's something that you would get. I don't know, it was probably revolutionary to kind of put it into there, but that's what was in there. And then I think they say after Ditko left, they didn't want the same thing with Kirby, so they went and said, how do you want the titles to read? And he's like, oh, can you make it a Stan and Jack production? And that's what it is, or Stan and Jack Classic. And that's what it was. And then the hard part is, at 78, this book comes out, and the credits is how they wanted to, what Kirby wanted to read is just say Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, right? That's how he wanted it to read. It's not written to say I plotted it. It's just they are both the creators on it. And of course, with people, at times saying, hey, didn't you do a lot more in this? It's like, yeah, you know what? That sort of thing. So ultimately, it's kind of sad that it's gone left. That Neil Kirby is kind of going out there, made an official statement and talking about the Fantastic Four and saying, hey, we're always going to the challengers, and now they decided that Kirby's father was named Benjamin, and his sister, the kid Sue, was named after his older sister Susan. So the names came from Kirby, and the characters and the dynamic came from the challengers. When the
Yeah,
challenge,
that doesn't. That's such a waste of time. It's almost like a vendetta at the at that point. Again, it's such a Ben, Susan. These are pretty common names at the end of the day.
yes, that's
Okay, and then
yeah.
it would also beg the question: well, did Stan know these people? Could he have created the names because he knew them and was thinking, "Oh, Ben's a cool name, Susan's a cool." It's a ridiculous. It's just a ridiculous position to. It's a ridiculous position to stand on and
Where does
try to make any headway from.
where does Reed come from? Like it's like what are we talking about here? And the hard part is that we know that I don't know. It's like
Give him
hmm?
give him time. I'll come up with something.
So that the thing of it is, and with the challengers, as much as I like the challengers, when I finally had multiple of the stories to read, it didn't really, outside of them being four people, didn't read to me like the Fantastic Four, because in the initial Fantastic, like the challengers are in regular clothes and they get into the accident and then they're in their gym suits, their outfits, right? And then the FF, they're in regular clothes. They're in space outfits and then they're in regular clothes. They only get outfits because Martin Goodman said they need outfits, or some letter someone wrote in and said these guys need costumes, and they almost had a mask. But then they realized, oh, we don't need to have them to have masks. So they took the masks off because Kirby threw him with a suit with a mask on, and Reed had a mask, and those get whited out, and they just have the functional, like the uniforms. Everyone has a similar uniform. So he's saying that, oh, because the challengers had uniforms, they have uniforms. It's just like we're asking a lot. We don't, but the heart of the challengers, the heart of FF is the dynamic of the arguing. The two of them got into arguing and it got this characterization. It's something that you didn't see in Kirby's work before this. You don't see in Justice League. Justice League, they're just all men of action, which is not a bad thing. That's what the movies were, But we got into what was, I guess, in the Lost Horizon, which had these different personalities in the novel, and then when you get to here, he's playing it out where he's having the different personalities go at each other, and that's why people look at the story, they find Reed saying something tough to Sue, and they're like, "What a jerk!" But the book was about conflict, so that's basically what you would do in this sort of thing. But ultimately, Kirby is a part of one of the most creative periods in comics and Marvel and Fantastic Four and Thor, especially the period where Marvel is rolling. So there's a lot of things that you can look at and say this is a big portion of Kirby, even though something like the Black Panther was heavily edited. You can see the panel, so there's a lot of back.
Oh, you
and
mean
forth.
you mean the Cold Tiger?
Yeah, so that's the thing. You have something where you see it, you don't see that sort of rejected pages as far as the rest of the stuff, but you see when it came to saying something that needed to be, fixed or worked over, a lot of stuff was chucked to get in what we had there. And once they figure that out, they're rolling. So we got so many things where you find out, oh, well, Jack had an issue with this and that. But the thing of it is, the magic that was going on, people want the creation. And this is a light documentary. It shouldn't have been, to go back what we started on, it shouldn't have been that big a deal. But then it's saying we now need to cut out all interviews where Stan Lee said, I came with an idea and then I called Jack and Jack drew it however he wanted to. How could he say that he called up Jack? My father said he came to Stan. The stuff was out of business. And I came with Iron Man and Thor and Fantastic Four, and I did this. Everybody says, "All right, sorry, you go."
The other thing I've always pointed out is that everybody loves to contend over this. Like, it's really the first 3-4 years of Marvel, and the rest of the stuff, because you got other guys in there, nobody really wants to have too much discussion. But those early days, that first 3-4 year period, when you're up until the part like who's the last guy to come out, like Doctor Strange, that sort of stuff. Everybody, that's the ripe stuff for arguing, and nobody ever is like, wait a minute, this was a lot of people like, hey, the Marvel stuff and everything of that nature. But then they totally, and I've said this before, they totally ignore all the fourth world stuff that Jack did with DC. They ignore the Eternal stuff when he came back to Marvel and the other things that he did when he came back to Marvel, in addition to the other stuff he did with DC as well, and the stuff that he did on his own. So it becomes like it's just this. And then I wonder, well, but that wasn't all he did. And to be quite honest, some of the stuff that he created after that, I find to be much more creative than what he was doing at this point. And he got the opportunity to do it on. I mean, the fourth world dynamic is pretty involved. It was well ahead of its time. Nobody wants to discuss that or talk about it, at least not until a movie. And then all of a sudden, we won't hear anybody say anything any longer. The Eternals, well, they had a movie that didn't quite work out the way anybody who was rooting for it would have come. But there was a whole bunch of stuff that Kirby did, which is a testament to his creativity. Some of the stuff I would say is more creative than what he was doing there at Marvel at the time on his own. Nobody wants to discuss that. It's just this. It's just this. It's like the guys who love Prince, but they only really love the Purple Rain album.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. None of the other stuff really matters. It's just that.
If it's this other bit, I guess I should bring this back up so to end it on here regretfully. And this means no disrespect to Neil Kirby, but he talks about though conflict between Lee and my father concerning creator credit is glanced over with little mention. There's more attention paid to the strife between Lee and Steve Ditko. Lee's voice proclaiming it was my idea, therefore I created the character. And then they talk about Steve Ditko rebuttal. But the difference is that there was, outside of Stan Lee saying that they fought over the Green Goblin, there had been no talk about, and Stan had been talking about creating Spider-Man for years. There was no talk about from Ditko saying who created what until this interview from the Comics Journal came out, and he said here in this article somewhere in here, he talks about I came up with Spider-Man and we gave it to Steve Ditko because I didn't have time to do it. But I designed him and I gave him the cover, right? It says it here. I created Spider-Man. We decided to give it to Steve Ditko. I drew the first Spider-Man cover, created the character, created the costume, created all those books. I couldn't do them all, right? So we decided to give the book to Steve Ditko. And that led him to say something back, just not saying I created, saying here's the dynamic of how it was created, right? Stan said I was inking, and then he told me the idea, and I said it's like the fly, and then he went away and he said, all right, now you're drawing it. And then that's how we got it. They said they chucked a lot of the ideas. They got rid of the magic ring and all that other stuff. And then they came up with the Spider-Man that they did. Even if people like to point out, well, that was an earlier Rawhide story that seems similar to type of deal. And it's just like, look, all right. In that period, well, at the same time, we're not even get into that. Ditko, at some point, him and Stan started talking, right? So the only reason why we know this is because that English guy did the documentary of Searching for Steve Ditko, right? So when he talked to Stan, that's when Stan said, hey, I think the guy who dreamed it up is the creator, right? When Ditko pushed back and said, you're saying co-creator, why can't you just say, why are you saying considering? And he, Stan stood on it and said what he felt, and then that has gone viral. That's the only reason why there's a big thing, but it wasn't a big thing after that. Steve Ditko said he didn't think, consider means to ponder. It's like it's saying that it is, and there was nothing after that. He didn't go after him again. The thing went viral, and Steve Ditko did some other articles. He already said what he had to say. He wasn't the type of guy that was going to keep. He said his complaint. He pointed out the articles that he disagreed with, and he wrote to the people, and that was it. He said what he had to say, and he moved on. People turned it into there's a back and forth. Now with Ditko, it took him till what 80? I think in 90 he wrote the thing with Spider-Man when he saw the article from Kirby, and then he saw a couple articles in the comic marketplace, and he wrote back to those things about when they weren't talking, and Stan said he thought that the lift in the building was only going to take a couple panels, and he said, well, at that point we weren't really talking, so it basically came in, so we never had to talk about that. So we just corrected him on those sort of things and a couple other things, but it wasn't like it was this big thing. The only reason why it was the documentary. So the estimation that Neil's talking about, why it's talked about because there's a movie, and why we're talking about Stan and Jack is because Stan is in a ton of movies. And regretfully, Kirby's gone. But when Kirby was alive, he was on the Hulk TV show. So if they both were alive, they would have been like the end of the wedding in the Fantastic Four. The two of them would be going to these movie things together. They would be putting Jack in there. They probably would have been, because they're not the same in age, but at the same time, they've gone through the same period. And they probably would have got a big laugh if they both were alive to see these movies being made. But it didn't happen. So it's a sad thing. And I think a lot of other people have said that before me. I think Roy Thomas and Todd McFarlane, that, like Stan just outlived everybody. So, this is where we get this from. But ultimately, that's the only reason why it became bigger, because there's a movie that came out. And see, every time there's a movie, things get blown up. People don't know about the Superman creators until the Superman movie comes out in '78, and then we know who they are, and that gets figured out. So this is how it happens. But you can't just say we got to change history and just say none of Stan's stuff. He can't say nothing. He can't say he's a creator. He can't say he can't say he wrote the dialogue, or else it's him attacking Kirby. It's not. Let's not fight over this. They're going too far. People are saying that they won. I'm going on too long. Any last words from you, Cal?
No, I thought. Well, no, I thought that. I mean, that's fair. And we have this poor practice of applying a modern day principle, to a past situation. Bottom line, if you were working at DC Comics under Mort Wessinger, and Mort Wessinger gave you an idea, and you decided and you crafted that idea into something, so on and so forth, Mort Wessinger didn't own the idea, and you didn't own what you crafted. That all belonged to DC, and they knew it. They understood that their job was to come over here, create characters, create these ideas to sell books. And they were salaried people, okay, or they had already signed whatever contracts they had, and they were work for hire. They did not own these characters. They didn't own them. Okay, but they still were responsible, and for rendering them, creating them, so on and so forth. Totally different time period, 1950 than 1980, and going on, so on and so forth. So the idea of, no, if you're following along with the practices of the time, okay, nobody can fault you for that. I mean, if you're following along with what's the established practice, the work practice of the time that we're looking at in terms of comics. What's more, the whole idea of giving credit is something that Stan Lee doesn't really get any credit for at the end of the day. But that's something where you change the practice, brings these guys in. Okay, first person to call Jack Kirby the king. That's something that's not addressed. And then we come forward and it becomes the same thing. Oh, what's the biggest fault of Stan? He outlived everybody. Okay, that's the big thing. He came over here. Man, if only. So now we're like really going into morally nebulous territory in terms of we want to address that. But a lot of the stuff is pretty clear. It's pretty clear cut. I thought that guy put his foot in the mouth with the interview, or else we might have had a totally different interview.
Yes.
But hey, it is what it is at the end. I would love to know this stuff. You can't do that with these two guys who did all of this stuff, under one set of circumstances, and then these characters go run and go take off at the end of the day. One guy's in one place, the other guy's in another place, and wonder, I wonder who created what. Like, and think that you really want to discuss that can of worms at the end of the day. And as somebody who's already, I've already been in situations where you do stuff with people, played music with people, who owns what, it's like, no, if everybody's working on it, everybody's working on it. The only time it becomes an issue is when it takes off. Then it becomes, well, wait a second. I believe I'm the person who said we should start with the bass line as opposed to the guitar solo. It's mine. You know, that stuff happens all the time, but there's
Does
enough documented evidence. There's enough
does it
documented evidence from Stan Lee himself that this should no longer be a discussion.
does it happen? I don't know that people actually do. People fight over who created what.
Yes. All the time.
I don't think I've ever experienced that. But I'm thinking the best part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because Iron Man is the first film, right? Iron Man is the first film, and then when they get to the credits, it says, you know, based on a character by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, was it either Kirby's first and then Don Heck. It might be Don Heck and Jack Kirby. Listed it like that because the person who came with the plot, Stan, the person who wrote the script, the full script, not script, wrote that this dialogue, is his brother, Larry Lieber. And then we have the artist, and then the person who designed it would be Kirby. So they put it out there as is. Same with Thor. The same where Thor, you know, Thor has Kirby. It didn't have Don Heck in that one, but it's like it had the credits to where they're supposed to be because in those characters that was the case. The Fantastic Four is different. That's a Stan and Jack thing. There's no other people. But we as fans have cut out Stan's brother. We just tossed him out and saying he's a shill who just lies for Stan. He didn't do anything. He just wrote the dialogue like Stan did and didn't have any involvement where we don't even, they got other creators who I always complain about some not saying it, saying that, talking about this, the dialogue meaning nothing. And it's not the case. You can't sit around here and say that this dialogue means nothing. You can put anyone, you can't get any monkey to do that. You know, that's why Marvel would have a test and have people to get to the dialogue, make sure they can get it right. And then, you know, that sort of thing. So ultimately, this is not anything negative to Kirby. He had a big hand in the Marvel universe. We should be at a stage where we can accept them as co-creators. They're both not here. It's not a Bob Kane situation. You know, we have, and Stan is only a big name because he was around to be in these movies. But at the same time, he was a person, as you said, he worked at New World and they were people that making film, but they, you know, the people, they said there that he's doing animation, right? And luckily in animation, they allowed him to do voiceover work, that sort of thing. But nothing where he came in and said, I want to do this. And they let him do it. You know, he'd have to take, you see how positive he was? There might be a ton of projects that he disagreed with, but he followed through. And at the same time at Marvel, he had no real power. He had things he wanted to do comic wise, but it had to go through the Marvel editorial, and they take an idea that he had and then they would turn it into what they felt. And then the Stan property would be on the tail end of would be in Marvel 2099. Stan's thing, which was the initial idea, was on the back burner. So it's like, yeah, it's what it is. This is not the most glorious period, but at the same time, he deserved to be the exec job, and he was always supporting, always positive. And then luckily they made movies and he was around for it. So that's what happened. You're fighting over the fact that he's in these movies in these bit parts, and people like or remember Stan and they don't know. That's they're fans. The whole point, they're straights. They're not going to know everything. You can't try as much as you put Kirby into the Superman cartoons and this, that, and the other. People are going to sit around and say Lennon or McCartney. And I was like, George Harris had a creative thing right towards the end of it where he blew up. He was thinking, they're going to say George. They're going to say Lennon and McCarthy. McCartney, sorry, not McCarthy. That's something way different. But you know, they're gonna go to what they can say is Batman, Bob Kane. We're gonna go to this thing. They're straights. You can't expect much out of them. And at the same time, he's not taking away. Go read the origins of Marvel Comics, saying he came up with the plot and then Stan drew it. Anyway, I'm getting myself all upset again. I'm a big fan. I have only respect and admiration and ton of Kirby comic books and trades and books about Kirby here. So there's nothing negative and there's nothing wrong to be him being a co-creator with Stan. This new thing of him having to have be created at all is just too far gone. It's too far gone.
That there's that, and then for all of the stuff of Stan being in these movies for bit parts and such, I still feel Marvel does not recognize him for the importance of what he was to the company. I just feel this documentary, while hey, I'm happy to see it, I did learn a couple things about Stanley that I didn't know. It's still very light in terms of giving him. I still think the DC Comics did a much better job of homaging Stan than Marvel Comics did, and all Stan ever did for DC Comics was that just the Imagine series. And the only reason why he did is because Marvel wouldn't give him a good contract. That's the only reason why he was over there writing at DC in the first place, or else he would have never been there. I
Well,
just feel that they did a better job of homaging him there. This is like really light, and I don't know if it's like a business thing where they're looking at it and they're like, look, we don't want to do too much, because we don't want to get into the point where it looks like Stan created more than he did, and then we got to deal with we got to deal with his hair the same way we got to deal with these Kirby people at the end of the day. So let's make certain we do something, and then just try to get out of here. But the amount of reverence that they have for Stanley for me seems, so light. Like they would just love to just give him a gold watch and put him out the pasture.
yeah, no, it's a thing of it's really a sad portion of this thing where they've gotten to a point where we don't want to deal with a backlash of people saying that Kirby created it all and Stan took the credit and did nothing. And it's just like, come on, like we're going too far here. And the hard part of it is, I don't want to get into him competing against his own Marvel stuff, but the thing of it is that the pendulum is going too far over to the other side. Yes, there was a period where everyone, me included, only knew Stan and we enjoyed the art. And then as you read and keep going, you start saying, oh yeah, Kirby had a hand in this stuff. He's plotting, he's helping out. Stan even said, hey, they were drawing it however they wanted, and saying, oh great, he's saying that he's, like we're both writers on it. And it's like, he did nothing. It's like, we have to do that, or else we're going to be insulting well, I don't know. Like, ultimately, we know Stanley has a daughter and she's not as vocal at any of these things. And at the same time, the Goodmans weren't too happy when his son couldn't run it, when the people wanted Stan to run Marvel. And Martin Goodman wanted his son Chip. Now Marvel had been struggling with Chip, and they were happy to have him out. And prayerfully, they did the Atlas comics where they offered a lot better. They offered better wages, but they went about the comic creating the wrong way, saying
Oh,
that
that's a show in itself. Good grief, Atlas Comics. Whoa,
yeah,
that's a show in itself. We gotta,
yeah.
yeah, we gotta do that one of these days.
So if you look at that, you're spending too much time, because I was there and I was like at some point being like, man, and you can see in the essentials, this will be my last point. The essentials they started putting as like a co-plotting thing, Stan and Jack and the Fantastic Four, but not for Thor for some reason. But they were putting that in there. But then at the same time, when you go to the Comics Journal where Kirby said that he did everything, it's like, well, Stan didn't say that Jack didn't do everything, that he did it all himself. So then I have to. What am I going to do? I'm going to sit around here. The same thing people complain about Stan. We're just going to allow Kirby to do that at the same time and saying, yeah, his memory was bad, but we don't allow for Stan to have a bad memory and say I created this. He has to say I created this with Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Dick Ayers, Don Heck. I got to say all the names every time. Like no one's going to be. You're gonna sit there like this. You're a little Excuse me, you're a little indecisive, huh? You like why don't you just say you did it? Stop being humble, that sort of thing. So nobody cares. But anyway, that's it. Any other last words? We're gonna close this one out. It's too emotional.
Hey, rest in peace to both those guys. Stanley,
Yes.
Jack, Kirby, you guys were the greatest. Love everything that you guys did together and separately for the most part. I have very few criticisms. Mean, it always will mean a lot. Okay, to the creative guys who ever lived, and I wish more people would just focus on that.
All right, Spinner Rack.
Out.